psychopath versus sociopath. So what the heck's the difference, but why do they share some common characteristics? Let's talk about that in tip number 80. Welcome back to 101 Interviewing Tips for Interviewers and Interrogators. We're up to tip number 80. Your host again, Stan Walters. Now, this time we want to talk a little bit about psychopaths and sociopaths. Now, first off, let me give a disclaimer. I am not a clinical psychologist. I'm not a clinical social worker. I'm giving you the lay observations in a lot of my reading and research on this particular area. My work is in criminology, sociology, deviant social behavior. So I do have an interest in this area and have studied and read extensively. And I would recommend that you as an investigator as well as an interviewer, you need to familiarize yourself with the difference between the two. Not so much that you're going to make an assessment or clinical evaluation, as it were, but to understand what's driving their sets of behaviors. The thing I want you to recognize is this is not really like a sickness as in psychosis. These folks are aware of what they're doing, they're conscious of their behaviors, but their behavior patterns are very remarkable, and you can see the distinction between the two. One thing I would suggest, now first of all, both psychopaths and sociopaths are currently under what's called a Diagnostic Statistical Manual, number 5, DSM-5. Do yourself a favor, go to a college campus, college bookstore, and you'll be able to find the little spiral version of this. This is what psychologists and psychiatrists and social workers use for classifying all different types of illnesses, from emotional disorder to personality disorders to psychoses to impulse control, other issues. And it'd be a good reference point for you to study and understand the various titles and diagnoses you may hear along the way as an investigator, and make you aware of what would be some of your good investigative leads and what to look for that will assist you as the interviewer to understand the thinking process. In the DSM-5, there is a classification called antisocial personality disorder. In the past, psychopath and sociopath were looked at as two different things, but they're now combined under this one label. Now, because if you forgive me for reading this, because I want to make sure you got this straight and understand exactly what the classifications are. So the common features of the psychopath and sociopath, they do share some characteristics. So it's difficult to make the assessment between the two. Okay? The way that's defined is that they carry three or more of the following traits. They regularly break or flout the law. Both will do that. They constantly lie and deceive others, which is our area we're looking at. They're impulsive. They don't plan ahead. They're prone to fighting and aggressiveness. They have little regard for safety for others. They're very irresponsible, particularly in their own behaviors, and they irresponsible financial obligations, family obligations to boyfriends, girlfriends, mates, and so forth. And they don't feel any sense of remorse. The biggest thing is they have a lack of empathy. What strikes me as the interviewer is the lack of empathy for others and what they're doing to them, and to the pain and horror that they're causing these folks. Technically, and if you really get down to splitting hairs on this, there is a subtle difference in the older literature. Psychopaths are thought possibly to have some predisposed genetic tendencies, if you will. That's not to say that it's genetically passed along, like brown eyes or left-handed, right-handed, or hair color. That's not what we're saying. But there is a element of it within their background, the personality that is susceptible, if you might say, or is vulnerable to becoming a psychopath. Where sociopaths, the difference is they got maybe the disposition, but society and conditions and raising and events as they're growing up in the socialization process appear to be what's the difference in the triggers. However, there are some psychopaths that also go through very tumultuous and difficult patterns of upbringing that will also exacerbate the situation. If I can give you some reading, and I'm an avid reader and researcher, and I read constantly. You need to be doing about 5 hours of reading a week. And let me give you 3 texts that will start to enlighten you understand a little bit about these folks. Not, again, that you're going to classify them, because classification is left to licensed psychologists, psychiatrists, and social workers. Okay, so working backwards, the text right now that I would let you take a look at is by Dr. Robert Hare, H-A-R-E, and it's Without Conscience, Psychopaths Among Us. He's considered right now the top expert in the field and has created the diagnostic manual for that you use to test, to classify someone as that type of behavior, okay? So you need to take a look at that one. You need the paperback. Going back a little further in 72, around, or about in the 70s, early 70s, 72, 73, right in there, you need to look at the work Inside the Criminal Mind by Samenow and Yochelson, S-A-M-E-N-O-W, and Yochelson, Y-O-C-H-E-L-S-O-N. They were treating psychopaths and exploring them, researching them out of St. Elizabeth's in Lorton, if I remember correctly, in Washington, D.C. The first real classification about psychopaths was a guy named Hervé Cleckley, C-L-E-C-K-L-E-Y, and it's called The Mask of Sanity. Now, all these three books you still can get a hold of and you can find them. I encourage you to read those and grasp the understanding. Now, the subtle differences between psychopaths and sociopaths. Psychopaths tend to have a little more organized behavior. They'll plan, they'll prep, they'll structure, they'll anticipate and look at the events ahead of time. It's a little easier for them to be almost invisible. They don't have to be criminal. Now, they'll walk that close to the criminal line. They'll be about that far off of it. And they'll do some things that are borderline ethical and go on all the way into the ethical, unethical behavior and criminal behavior. Sociopaths tend to be more lack of impulse control. They get an urge, they have it, they want it, they're going to do it, and they just do it. With both of them, there appears to be very little limitations in what they'll try. They have a tendency to have long records of misconduct, misdeeds from one extreme to the other. You know, full-blown criminal to just barely walking the line, okay? Most of the materials I read that these folks start their behaviors around the age of about 15. And again, that's just a statistical number. Men typically outnumber women 2-to-1 in this category. I've seen figures that say that about 7% of our population fit into this antisocial area. But I wanted you to get to understand that because the titles are thrown around a lot. And you see people just label them without any really classification and really understanding what the differences are. Not that it totally makes a difference when it comes to, you know, to the labels, but for you as the interviewer to understand what's going through your subject, what's driving them. What a message I also want you to get is that using an emotional appeal, using an appeal for guilt, making an appeal for the person to feel bad about what the victims they've attacked or the institutions they've gone after or what havocs they wreak, okay? That's not going to happen. You're also not going to outsmart them in terms of using bluffing or using your leverage or using behaviors that, you know, because your title. These are challenging interviews, and you have to do very factually based. They will lie, and the tactic often is that I've seen, let them lie a long way out, then come back and cut their legs off, you know, from them when you have details a little bit later. Or get the commitment up front, use strategic use of evidence. So please do some research and understand those names that are thrown around, but you would do yourself a world of good by reading up on these three areas, reading those texts that I would describe for you, and understand a psychopath, and then you can see why some of these folks are difficult to investigate and why they're a challenge to interview. Often in the interview, and a piece of research I read recently, these folks blame their victims for creating the environment in which they can act out. If the victim hadn't behaved or done this way, presented themselves a certain way, and this is part of their dialogue, this is something you can use in the interview, then this would have never happened. So take a look and familiarize yourself with these two folks. Now, if you would, please hit the like button below. Again, let me again remind you, I'm not a psychologist, psychiatrist. I just do in-depth research and reading it heavily because it's an important part of what we do as investigators. But share this link, hit the share button, hit me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, the other social medias that at the time. And if you're looking to use very intuitive, very advanced interviewing tactics, innovative skills for your folks, please give me a call. We'll see what we got on the schedule and see if we can help your folks with their interviewing skills. So until we meet again for tip number 81, this is Stan Walters reminding you, be safe.